All right, hello, and welcome to part two of going through Carlyle's Labor and Reward from Past and Present with my friend Rasid here. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing perfect. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's good. We're just the first out of Christmas here, and
Yeah, as good as you can be in Christmas during lockdown. How,
there's
how
been
are the
distinct lack
lockdown?
of labor going on the last few days.
Oh my goodness, lack of labor. Yeah, indeed. We're here. We are. I thought we were going to talk about labor last week, and I had a lot to say about how hard it must be for both of us to be like doing in labor. And I thought like this week it's definitely not like appropriate to talk about labor in terms of like our immediate experiences. Although I was still working this week. We don't have Christmas breaks.
Yeah, so this is going to be on Carlyle's the next chapter in Past and Present that comes immediately after Labor, which is Reward. They're linked because he's trying to set you up with the idea of labor as something sacred, and then in Reward, I think he's trying to flesh out the ideas he brought up, whilst also bringing in how you should feel once you've performed labor, right?
Yes, indeed. Although I would say it kind of feels like it's just continuing the last chapter for about half of the chapter itself. It seems like labor two, and then the halfway through we become reward.
Yeah, there's still a
But
lot
yeah,
of
it's
labor.
interesting. Yeah, more labor than the last labor, considering this is actually more than twice as long as the last chapter. Which is why we won't go through the entire thing. We handpicked certain sections of the text to read out loud, and then we will talk about it in a broader context. And most of the text we highlighted is more towards what's happening right now, as opposed to what was happening in the 1800s with the Corn Law and.
Yeah, I'll just make that clear for anyone who wants, a real deep dive on the corn laws. This isn't going to be the stream for it. I actually do have a slight soft spot for it. I think it's an interesting one, but this isn't going to be the place for it. If I do it, it might be in the context of wider British thing than just merely Carlyle,
Yeah.
and then Carlyle can sort of squeeze in. But Past and Present, as a larger book was the Condition of England book, and part of the Condition of England is the Corn Laws. So I think there is a space for it, but when you just simply strip at labor and reward and try and abstract that, especially to the modern day, we're gonna go with the abstractions. So, do you want to read the opening paragraph?
Well, yeah, sure, I can read it, and then you'll read the next one when we're going through it. But yeah, the opening paragraph is starting out. Reward. Religion, I said. For properly speaking, all true work is religion. And whosoever religion is not work may go and dwell among the Brahmins, Antimonians, spinning dervishes, or where it will. With me it shall have no harbor. Admirable was that of the old monks. Laborare est orare. Work is worship. So yeah, the first paragraph immediately reiterates both last chapter and gives a more context towards it. It's the first time laborare est orare is mentioned, which is the Latin proverb that I haven't heard before. But yeah, it does mean work is worship. And let me see. He mentions it a few times throughout the chapter. We'll probably not get to the others that much because they're usually mentioned in like repeat paragraphs. So, but yeah, that's the first chapter.
He does want it as a mantra.
Yeah, I just have to quickly mention something. Spinning dervishes is, I believe he's talking about the Sufi. I don't know what the Brahmins or Antimonians mean. I haven't read that much about them. But spinning dervishes comes from the Sufi practice of basically spinning. Have you ever seen it before? Or
no, I'm not too familiar.
Think of a child sort of spinning around.
Okay.
It's sort of a dance. And it's a sort of spiritual exercise the Sufi Muslims do. In my country, it's originated from Turkey, and they still do it in certain times of the year. And yeah, it's basically just a part of religious practice. I think here Carlyle is talking about any religious practice that doesn't involve direct work. I don't think he would like, sitting at a church for a few hours as well, considering that he's very interested in the religion being immediate work and immediate creation of value. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Spinning dervishes, at least they're kind of in movement. They're creating a sweat.
Yeah.
But I suppose maybe he's thinking of it in terms of a dance, and dance is usually associated with frivolity.
And I would say he probably doesn't know about Sufi that much, because at that time I doubt there are big, very well-known translations of Rumi or any Sufi. It's probably, because I know that Carlyle reads a lot of travel books and all these researches on even Muslim culture. I think he knows more about Muslim culture than like Emerson, for instance, because he has really researched it. But I do think he thinks that Sufis are a bunch of like what you call hippies in the Muslim world that spin and go like it's so cool. Whereas Sufis are actually basically the center of the arts. Basically, it's kind of like Athens back in Greek period. It's when they become popularized by this guy called Rumi I mentioned before, and he was basically what I would call akin to Dante or Virgil, in that he was a poet whose works are so popular that it reaches beyond the aisle. Like people like Madonna is extolling Rumi, although for completely wrong reasons. But Rumi was one of the myth makers, like essential myth makers of Islamic culture. He, just like Virgil was for Rome, he created a creation myth for Rome so they could place themselves into the whole Homeric epic itself. Whereas Rumi created certain stories within his major work, which is the Masnavi, where certain aspects of Islam, like the fact that why did Islam needed to exist if there was Christianity, he made stories that are very interesting, that are also being read in the West, that explained away some of the parts that we just sort of know only basically or in an abstract manner. He made up stories to explain them. And decent translations of Rumi didn't appear until like 20th century, especially in English. And I don't think like there are really great translations in even Turkish, the modern day Turkish, although it was written in Persian. But that's just an aside. It's not, he's probably not very aware of the spinning dervishes as a whole, because he doesn't mention Dante in the later parts of the chapter.
Well, Dante, of course, is one of his hero as poet. He picks out Dante and Shakespeare. So
I would say, like, if he had read Rumi, he would have thought similarly, at least like in the same way as Dante, because Rumi is basically that for Islam. Although I would probably suggest he has more of a sense of humor. A lot of his tales are quite funny in the right context. Yeah, if anyone's interested in Rumi, there are some good translations of. I'll probably talk about it when we go to the second chapter of Heroes, because it talks about Islam as a whole and like what.
Yeah, that could be very interesting.
I'll talk about it more there. I'll give you a decent enough translation in my thoughts, because most of the translations, especially the one Madonna likes, is where the author sort of like removed a bunch of sections they didn't like, especially the ones talk about Islam, and just made a very popular, best-selling book of Proverbs, just like they do with Eastern philosophy. Like people like Alan Watts take hand cherry pick certain quotes and make it into a story. But let's go on to the second. I mean, if you have anything to add in the first chapter, which is pretty short compared to the later.
Yeah. It's funny you went on about Rumi there, but what it reminded me of, obviously, he mentions the monks, right? Mm-hmm. And he calls it. It was admirable of the old monks, laborare est orare.
Yeah.
And what I thought of was Martin Luther, of course, was a monk in what Carlyle would consider the later monks, and he gives Luther a place on Hero as Priest in his lectures there. And so Luther also grew very despondent with the state of his soul that he was experiencing through the monastic life. This is leading up to the Reformation, years before it. So perhaps it is something that had come in early with the Benedictines. I think Luther was an Augustinian, but like that because it was an old saying of the monks, it had sort of decayed by the time it got to Luther, and then you needed that like man of action in Luther to reassert work into the idea rather than like idle prayer, which wasn't hitting at the soul of it. That could certainly be a Carlylean position there. That's all I really had to say on that.
Yeah, quite a bit. So, yeah, it's an old saying that lost its power until Luther came in.
Maybe not as a saying, but as an ethos, as something actually lived out. Yes, perhaps that's certainly an angle Carlyle, I think, would have accepted. So will we go for the entire second paragraph?
I think so. I think we should go.
I'll give it a go.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
So older than all preached gospels was this unpreached, inarticulate, but ineradicable, forever enduring gospel. Work, and therein have well-being. Man, son of earth and of heaven, lies there not in the innermost heart of thee a spirit of active method, a force for work, and burns like a painfully smouldering fire, giving thee no rest till thou unfold it, till thou write it down in beneficent facts around thee. What is immethodic, waste, thou shalt make methodic, regulated, arable, obedient and productive to thee. Wheresoever thou findest disorder, there is thy eternal enemy. Attack him swiftly, subdue him, make order of him, the subject not of chaos, but of intelligence, divinity, and thee. The thistle that grows in thy path, dig it out, that a blade of useful grass, a drop of nourishing milk, may grow there instead. The waste cotton shrub, gather its waste white down, spin it, weave it, that in place of idle litter there may be folded webs, and the naked skin of man be covered. So the crux of that I liked and took from it, of course, it's very like Carlylean high energy, like get up, man, what are you doing sort of tone.
Indeed. I had actually only marked the first sentence, I believe, where and how well-being.
Again, it's about making order out of chaos. And I think in the last one we discussed about how chaos is a vacuum, right? Or chaos can be a pit.
Indeed.
So, but and how the vacuum of space, he talked about, he compared the spinning of the potter's wheel, right, to the formation of the planets, was one of the most powerful images we got from the last piece. And again, he's going for that, like, how can you create something out of nothing? How can you end the vacuum? And creating something out of nothing is akin to, putting order in where there was disorder and having material where there was a vacuum. Or, not just material. I don't want this to be materialistic, but creating something of worth where there was a vacuum. And so the bit that I highlighted was, what is immethodic waste? Thou shalt make methodic, regulated, and arable. And arable is a real, it's an interesting word, because it reminds me of, again, I mentioned what's Carlyle going for if you go for something from the classical tradition. I mentioned the last one. I think of Hesiod's Working Days. It's literally translated as Working Days. And in it, he's got a lot of like farming instructions. How are you going to cultivate land, and the importance of cultivating land? And so I think by throwing in the word arable, he's bringing us back to that basic human, that innovation, right? Which was the agricultural
he talks
revolution.
about manual labor a lot, especially involving like stuff that you would assume with farming. He talks about that quite a bit. So the whole, I haven't read Hesiod, but yes, he does believe that a lot of work is extremely active and sort of done with your whole body almost. Although I don't know how he would feel about work, especially considering he's a writer. But yeah, he talks about quite the muscles and like their movements quite a bit in this chapter. But I only highlighted the first sentence, which is work and therein have well-being, which is interesting. It says like basically that you think you need all of these things to have well-being. In the modern era, you think you have to have like comfortable living conditions. You need to have enough of a wage to like not only support yourself but actually support your image, and you need sort of like you need to over monitor almost your emotions, and if you have like sad emotions you should go to therapy and all that stuff. We have in this in modern world, it's very diluted what is exactly having well-being. That's why we have like a whole Instagram movement called wellness, which I'm actually in. But what do you think about that? The work and there and how well-being, because if this is true, then I should just change. For everyone who's listening, I work at a dietitian Instagram account. I work for the company's dietitian Instagram account, and I work in this wellness manner. And if this is true, I should just, the next few posts, you should say, how do you want to live a fulfilling life? Well, just work and therein have well-being. And that'll be the
direction of the local
1,000 posts. What do you think?
I think Carlyle, when he talks about work, I think he liked how well grounded, right? It's a awful sort of pun-like word to use there, but how grounded work with the farm was, that it really did bring us back to, I suppose, nature, but also something primordial. He always likes it when the mask kind of slips from man and they reveal little primordial truths, because I think he takes them as real kernels of truth. When in the French Revolution, he always will give an adjective primordial to certain acts that happen when the crowd loses control and things like this. And I think he finds that arable work, that strenuous work, as a primordial order, and that it's a kernel of truth in us that we can make order by doing physical labor.
Indeed.
I also wanted to add at this point that so there's always this current online of Oswald Spengler and his cyclical theory of history, which is kind of coming up again in certain circles online, similar to the way Carlyle is. And just Carlyle is very different to Spengler. Spengler is a pessimist. He believes everything is has its own phases of growth and decay, like a leaf or any sort of piece of biology, that you can then talk about that in civilizations and so on. And he believed that the West was in a civilizational decay in like the 1920s. So, but Carlyle here is more thinking of what decays is only what's idle. So if you leave something idle, it will decay, it'll deteriorate. But if you set something to active use, and it can be seen as a sort of renewal and repair, and you can link that to reward, right? The reward is you don't become idle and don't lead yourself to decay. So I just thought that was interesting, that it's kind of like through work that you stop the decay. It's kind of the Carlylean position.
Yeah, do you think that's an idealist position, or is it more akin to what he's trying to give to someone, especially in this chapter where it talks about work as religion? Religion usually doesn't have to make complete scientific sense for it to be believed. So what do you think on that matter? Do you think if this is an idealist thought, the fact that if you work, you won't decay, like if you'll have well-being? What do you think?
Personally, there's a truth in it. It's very difficult to know. Like work has changed even so much from the time of Carlyle, that we need to be more open to ideas of work and what constitutes work than the Carlyle position. For instance, now I don't know if we're working, like I'm sitting down.
We're sitting down. I don't know exactly what you do. What is?
I just work in software. Like I'm in front of a
Oh
screen
yeah.
all day. So I think there is truth in it. I think idleness is still. We talked about how idleness has had almost become a virtue in 2020. Idleness for me is still a real plague. And when we talk about people's mental health, it's for kind of the in vogue term. I
Indeed.
think
And also,
idleness amongst men especially leads to this. Just you keep the work going, and you'll keep a man in a saner position. So I
oh,
think there is a
definitely.
lot of truth in what Carlyle's getting at. But
Yeah, most
let's not get
quite a
hung
bit
up
of.
on how physical the work needs to be, but let's get hung up
Oh
on
yeah,
eradicating idleness. That
yeah.
would be kind of my position.
Yeah, you think that work should also start becoming more physical, whereas we should also like try to eradicate the notion that work can be done mostly sitting, as we both are doing at the moment. We both are quite sitting, uh, quite sitting. Yeah, we both are sitting in work. Although I would argue that Carlyle also sits while working, unless he has one of those chic standing desks that people always say.
He is a
"Oh,
man of paradoxes. Like we
yeah,
have to
yeah, we do
throw
have, we
that
have.
in. It's a innate part of reading Carlyle is that he is quite paradoxical. He loves his ramblings and his rants. He almost he gets seized by an energy and goes
Yeah,
off on one. And it's always not necessarily that is completely coherent with the last sort of seizure of energy that possessed him.
yeah,
Um,
indeed. So should
so
we go on
yeah,
to
we
all
can
true work
continue.
is sacred, or should do you
I
have
just have one
anything
bit
in between?
before
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
which is again we touched upon it right in the last one how silence and
Oh
work
yeah,
and what was that, a reverent silence, or was it a silence of fortitude, and this sort of discussion. And he kind of elaborates on that again here with the highest God, as I understand it, does audibly so command thee, still audibly if thou have ears to hear. He, even he, the capital H, with his unspoken voice, awfuler than any Sinai thunders or syllabled speech of whirlwinds, for the silence of deep eternities, of words from beyond the morning stars. Does it not speak to thee? And so it's just an elaboration on that idea of through silence, you reach the deep eternity, and that you latch onto something that is eternal. That's certainly a belief he has.
yeah. He has this obsession with working in silence, and so yeah, this is a small tangent, but I actually read a few essays online that people have wrote about labor and reward. And the people who talk about like Carlyle's ideas usually have this idea that Carlyle, he goes on extolling the virtues of work. They think that when Carlyle talks about work, Carlyle only mentions the jobs that people love doing, like people are very passionate with, and they are happy to work in those jobs. And I'm reading Carlyle and I'm thinking that's not actually what Carlyle is really talking about when he talks about like working in silence, especially because he does talk about, especially in the chapter Happy, that we're probably never going to get into because it's 95% corn law. But in chapter Happy, he talks about that, what is exactly being happy? I mean, should you enjoy your work almost all the time, or should you even like enjoy it in the first place? Isn't your work supposed to isn't the what you produce what's important rather than how or what you felt while producing it? He sort of goes into it. So I think he's not so simple as to say that work is great and you should do it, but only the type of work that you love doing, which is also I don't know, it's kind of a weird paradox. What do you think on that matter? Because he kept hearing that criticism about labor and reward a lot, that Carlyle just thought that it's one of these modern jobs that people love and people have great communities that they work in. He just means those type of work. He doesn't mean like the type of work that's really hard and you feel really tired at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't know what essays you're reading, but I just 100% disagree with that. Carlyle very often and clearly attempts to arrest in his past and present the condition of England question, which is all about the working poor and the state of the poor, and are they getting worse in the Industrial Revolution, because it's the 1830s, 1840s. It's really kicking off in England. We haven't seen it in other countries to this extent yet, so it is an unknown quandary they're dealing with. And what he's talking about when he gets about work is, yes, how are you going to instill in these working classes a sort of genuinely good, healthy life, and that includes a spiritual life. So he is preoccupied with the plight of the poor.
But how does it relate to happiness itself? Like happy jobs and stuff.
Well, you touched on the word there, produce, right? And he talks about things having to be arable earlier. So a produce, right, is yielded from the ground, and similarly, your reward, your produce will be yielded from your work. Is how it's what he's getting at, I think, anyway.
But the work process itself doesn't mean you have to be happy while you're doing it, or like in the sort of romanticized manner, especially like nowadays. People say like, "Oh, I love my work because I get to travel, I get to make vlogs and stuff," and at the end of the day, there are works that when you do, it's like this never-ending vacation. But that's not exactly what Carlyle means when he means work. He does mean hard work and sort of like reward in the produce. That is an interesting way of looking at it. He doesn't mean that you should be happy while you're doing it, but you should be happy that you're producing, which is this, again, religion of work, kind of. Yeah. So yeah, you read the last one. I'll read "All true work is sacred" and on, unless you have something to add.
No, let's carry on.
Okay, let's go. All true work is sacred. In all true work, were it by true hand labor, there is something of divineness. Labor, wide as the earth, has its summit in heaven. Sweat of the brow, and up from that to the sweat of the brain. Sweat of the heart, which includes all Kepler calculations, Newton meditations, all sciences, all spoken epics, all acted heroisms, martyrdoms, up to that agony of blood sweat, which all men have called divine. That's how much I highlighted. Do you have something to? Do you want to read a bit more?
It was the exact same part that had drawn my attention as well. Yeah. So I don't know if you can talk about why that part stood out for you.
Oh yeah, all true work. Let me see. Okay, so first of all, he talks more about the divineness of work, and he talks about different types of sweat, which is interesting. Sweat of the brain. Brain. We both know brain doesn't sweat, but he does put the sort of intellectual work into the pantheon as well for the first time. The other parts are mostly about hand labor and the fact that you're working in this big industry and so forth. But yeah, what do you think about sweat of the brow, and after that from the sweat of the brain, sweat of the heart, which includes stuff, and agony of blood sweat? What do you think of these images?
I'd actually I'd taken in same lines how there's even today in a more metaphorical sense, right? If you're commending work done by somebody, you will often use phrases like blood and sweat or sweat and tears as a way of capturing effort that someone put into something. So even though that physicality doesn't often twin itself with the work that was done by somebody, you will still use phrases such as the blood and sweat or the sweat and tears, and it just harks back to what Carlyle's also trying to hark back to, is like that old physical graft, that struggle, and that it is commendable once you have tried something hard enough that it is causing the body to like either bleed or sweat, and you're carrying on. So it's almost like you get hit with this adversity, but you
and another's like another reaffirmation of the fact that he's not very much interested in this, work is never-ending vacation because it's so fun sort of idea. He talks about the agony of blood sweat, for God's sake. I think the person who wrote the essay didn't read reward or happy. I think they just read labor. I don't know. Maybe they're an English major. Who knows? Yeah, but the next part that I highlighted is actually in the same paragraph, but it's a little ahead. It's, to thee heaven, though severe, is not unkind. Heaven is kind, as a noble mother. Hold on. As that Spartan mother, saying, while she gave her son his shield, with it, my son, or upon it, thou too shalt return home in honor, to thy far distant home in honor, doubt it not. If in thee battle thou keep thy shield, thou in the eternities and deep death kingdoms art not an alien, though everywhere art a denizen. Complain not, though very Spartans did not complain. It follows up in the next paragraph, but we can just quickly talk about this concept of the Spartan mother, which he uses as a sort of notion that, okay, I'm telling you all this agony of blood, sweat, and all these really hard stuff, but if you look at it through this more sophisticated way of looking at it, it's actually kind in that it's either it's in league with nature, the whole everything being a struggle, or that it's a different type of kindness as to like accepting the harshness of reality and finding sort of peace within that. So yeah, that part really interested me, the whole image of the Spartan mother, which is one of those fortunate images that only has one paragraph and doesn't share it with any other images of like deep death kingdoms. Actually, it does share it with deep death kingdoms, but we all forgot about it anyways. So go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a slight attack going on here about the English analytical tradition of sort of removing oneself from it. Think of the extraction from Descartes, I think therefore I am, and then that turning into enlightenment, post-enlightenment, just right at the end. Thou in the eternities and deepest death kingdoms art not an alien, thou everywhere art a denizen. So a denizen being a person or something that lives or is found in a particular place. So you do have a particular place. Even as you go into the deep eternities, you find your place, sort of thing. And I think that's where he thinks the mind goes when it reaches that silence it performs during work. That it doesn't isolate. You don't get isolated. You don't get alienated, but you actually realize yourself as a denizen in the place.
And do you think that's the kindness of heaven, or the Spartan mother?
Well, or Spartan
you have a place.
Kind? I'm not too sure about that one, to be honest. I don't know where the kindness of heaven's coming in particularly. I would maybe perhaps a satisfaction.
Heaven is kind.
There's a satisfaction in knowing you're not an alien, that you're a denizen or something. Not sure about kindness.
Well, it does mention it, especially in this image of a mother. But yeah, it's kind of, it's very open to interpretation, I guess.
But I think a Spartan mother would have set their child to work, right?
Yeah, he says like, with it, my son, or upon it, meaning that you throw your shield away and I don't care about it. You have to keep your shield. Either you return with it or you die on top of it. So She is kind, but the kind of kind that's very much...
You'll only understand her kindness. Understanding her kindness, you can think of as a reward. So you go through the ordeal, and then it's only afterwards that you understand the kindness.
Yeah, there is no kind of kindness for cowardice. She is completely against cowardice. The Spartan mother, she cares about her son, but she doesn't care if he succumbed to cowardness and throw away his shield. Yeah, that was one of the most interesting images within Reward. Although we're going to get to another one soon, and we're 30 minutes in, which is pretty good considering we're almost halfway through the chapter. So the next paragraph, which is and who art thou, the braggest. You can go on with that. And how long are we going to read it for?
I'm just going to go down about halfway.
Man and his life are a lie, right?
Exactly. So here's the first half of this paragraph.
Yeah, let's go.
And who art thou that braggest of thy life of idleness? Complacently showest thy bright gilt equipages, sumptuous cushions, appliances for folding of the hands to mere sleep. Looking up, looking down, around, behind, or before, discernest thou, if it be not in Mayfair alone, any idle hero, saint, god, or even devil, not a vestige of one. In the heavens, in the earth, in the waters, under the earth, is none like unto thee. Thou art an original figure in this creation, a denizen in Mayfair alone, in this extraordinary century or half century alone. One monster there is in the world, the idle man. What is his religion? That nature is a phantasm, where cunning, beggary, or thievery may sometimes find good victual. That God is a lie, and that man and his life are a lie. So, yeah, I mean, the last line there is quite powerful. That idleness leads you to that conclusion, right? And he throws in Mayfair, of course, which would have been the upper class area. So I think he's thinking of and he has another chapter in Past and Present called on the non-working aristocracy, and I think that is possibly an element of what he's biting at here. That they are idle when they should be in positions of extreme responsibility. But then, the creation of nature as a phantasm from that idleness, I thought is actually a place perhaps it kind of harks to Emersonian ideas, but Emerson would probably say there's always a truth in nature, right? You can't turn nature into a phantasm before you. Nature is what reveals its truth to you. But nevertheless, I think he is kind of getting closer to his Emersonian side when he goes there, because he's talking about how nature is interacting with the man. So for the idle man, nature becomes the phantasm.
Yeah, he does mention that where cunning, beggary, or thievery may sometimes find good victual. People usually, cunning and thievery is usually sort of, especially cunning itself, is considered a part of noble society where you have to be sort of, you have to use cunning rather than like hard labor to get ahead in certain classes or certain environments. You definitely see it in like these history books, especially about nobles, although I don't know if the current noble society, like especially in places like Britain where you have lords, have the same implications.
That's just an empty shell of what it was. Like, I wouldn't. Titles alone remain, you know.
Yeah, lords. I don't know a single lord. They're probably not very famous. Anyhow, but the part that I found interesting was the first part of that paragraph was the complacently shewest thy bright gilt equipages, sumptuous cushions. So we don't have much sumptuous cushions, unless like you were an upper class pop.
Picturing like, everything in Carlyle's house being like really rigid and wooden, and almost like he's almost enjoying the splinters coming from the wooden chair.
Yeah, but the sumptuous cushions part, I thought, we don't have much, especially widespread sale of sumptuous cushions, but we definitely have some widespread sales of something like sumptuous shoes. That sort of made me think of this. This line made me think of a Key and Peele sketch. Do you know Key and Peele?
Yes.
So they have this sketch where a guy comes in with this really brand name hat and he's showing it off, and the other guy gets jealous. So he gets the next brand name hat, but this time he keeps the sticker on it. And then the other guy sees that new brand name hat, so he gets another brand name hat that's in a casing itself on his head he has the casing and the brand name hat on top of his head. And the next guy, seeing that, comes in with a whole like stand on top of his head, where a sort of like this third world worker, the sweatshop worker, is working on the next hat. So he's like very proud that he's wearing that hat that's being made by that sweatshop worker on top of his head.
I have seen that one.
So this idea that these, especially the people that are going, like DJ Khaled, for instance, he's going on about his shoe collection, where he's got like these limited edition Nike shoes that are worth absolutely nothing in like, objective terms. They're worth absolutely nothing. They're made in China. They'll explode on you if you ask some basketball players at certain instances. But these people that have more money than they know what to do with are trying to show to like their followers and their the wannabes that, you, in order to be cool, you gotta own all of this useless stuff that, if you look at it very deeply, is just a Chinese sweatshop worker making them while getting paid almost nothing. It's very interesting that he talks about sumptuous cushions, and the first thing I thought about, sumptuous shoes are they're this generation's sumptuous cushions, that people own more shoes than they can do with, and they are proud because it has a fucking brand on its title. Yeah, which is very interesting. What do you think about that?
I think you can boil it down to, and it's more important to think of it in our contemporary era even than in Carlyle's, because in Carlyle's he could talk about that luxury, that decadence, as confined to this class in Mayfair he's talking about, whereas now it's ubiquitous, right? You can find it anywhere really across the globe.
And usually sold to people who can't even like properly afford the stuff too.
I think I think a phrase that works is that we were talking about produce, right? Mm-hmm. Think on your own produce, not on products. So produce rather than products is the Carlylean position, and the produce being what's yielding from your own crops, which is your labor. So that's the reward, not products, right? Product is not reward.
Yeah.
And there's also a little bit, like, I think you took some umbrage with the spinning dervishes earlier on. There was this old like European position that associated the Occident and anything in the East with sort of luxurious decadence, right? It comes from all the products having arrived via the Silk Road from that direction. So I think that's what, the cushions and all of that sort of thing. I'm picturing someone at Mayfair who's like got all these worldly comfort appendages to their furniture. And that's kind of linking back to why he would look east and kind of slag off Eastern religions, because he probably sees this and want to go.
Oh yeah.
He's kind of linking the two, right? He's linking the exotic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe, I don't know the exact timing where Past and Present was released as opposed to Heroes, but in Heroes he does talk about the nature of like Islam, and especially the Prophet Muhammad, that he was, I believe he does mention, besides him being a soldier, that he was a merchant, which is what the Prophet
Muhammad, I think he would have had a lot of time for the energy that got unleashed during like that conquest would have fascinated him. But I think he would have seen
East as like this
in his own time as a decadent stage,
especially like the art of the time, also quite the art that's related to Oriental culture, especially like Angres's Turkish slave and all that stuff. It does show like, they're a decadent culture that's like we can make basically porn out of. Which is very interesting how they saw like Islam as opposed to how they saw like Islamic countries nowadays. But it's very interesting. That's what made me interested in that part of the paragraph.
Yeah, good. It's definitely one you can
relate
apply to our own times. Great.
Yeah. Although most of the stuff can be applied to own times, besides the extremely religious aspect that he views work, which would be nice if it would be applied to our own time.
Well, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to recreate it, right, in 2020, almost 2021 now.
Yep.
But I don't know. The next bit I had is this bit on the Bank of England.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I haven't.
So one thing I will say here, in special reference to the former class, the noble and the noblest. So this is linked with how he's talking about their decadence or in Mayfair and so on. But throwing light on all other classes and their arrangements of this difficult matter, the wages of every noble work do yet lie in heaven or else nowhere. Not in Bank of England bills, in Owen's Labour Bank, or any of the most improved establishment of banking and money changing, needest thou, heroic soul, present thy account of earnings. Human banks and labour banks know thee not, or know thee after generations and centuries have passed away, and thou art clean gone from rewarding all manner of bank drafts, shop tills, and Downing Street exchequers, lying very invisible so far from thee. So what he's saying there is the reward is not in these cushions that we had earlier, but it's not also in the accumulation of capital. And it's not in the Bank of England bills is not your reward. The reward lies in heaven or else nowhere. And I think that is extremely sort of this work is sacred.
Indeed.
Because now I would just juxtapose. I would contrast that a little bit with people who can accumulate capital and then sort of reinvest it in further work, right? So if you're think of the idea of like setting your money to work, there's a thing, don't just have it lying there. You can sort of use the cash as a sort of mill of reinvesting and improving your work. So I would caveat that a little bit, but I think what he's saying is he's trying to tear himself away from the capitalists, and he's also trying to tear away himself from the socialists, which is why he references Owen's Labour Bank. And Owen there is a reference to Robert Owen, who spanned much of Carlyle's life. He would have been a little bit older than Carlyle, but he was originally like a textile manufacturer and then a utopian socialist. So he had all these. He was very early socialist in the cooperative movement, right? So if you think of a co-op bank or something, that's what he's talking about. These Owen Labour banks. He's like, that's not going to work, right? You can't just redistribute things in your utopian socialist way and think that people are going to have any sort of spiritual fulfilling reward from what they're doing. And I suppose that's quite prescient for what was going to come in the 20th century. Which is why I was very interested. He almost takes a third position on it, on the debates of the time. It's like, it's not in the Bank of England bills and it's not in Owen's Labour Bank. Your reward is in the work itself, in this third position.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Although some people would argue that the way capitalism was built on creating value did make certain countries very rich on the upcoming centuries, and its people at least more stable and happier. But yeah, that's a discussion for another day. If we go into like the economics of this chapter, I think we'll be here till tomorrow. Anyhow, so I've actually highlighted, that paragraph, but a little ahead, and then a little bit of the paragraph after. So I should just. For saving time, we should just read both. I should just read both of them.
Yeah, read them both in a go there.
Okay. Was it thy aim and life purpose to be filled with good things for thy heroism, to have a life of pomp and ease, and be what men call happy in this world, or in any other world? I answer for thee deliberately, no. The whole spiritual secret of the new epoch lies in this, that thou canst answer for thyself, with thy whole clearness of head and heart, deliberately, no. My brother, the brave man has to give his life away. Give it, I advise thee. Thou dost not expect to sell thy life in an adequate manner. What price, for example, would content thee? the just price of thy life to thee. Why, God's entire creation to itself, the whole universe of space, the whole eternity of time, and what they hold, this is the price which would contend thee, that, if thou wilt be candid, nothing short of that. And then I'm going to skip a little bit. Thou wilt never sell thy life or any part of thy life in a satisfactory manner. Give it like a royal heart. Let the price be nothing. Thou hast then, in a certain sense, got all for it. Now, this is what is very interesting about this chapter. Now, he just basically said he said something that's very interesting, because considering his later political stances, because he said that give your life away for nothing. He said it in a more philosophical manner, but it does make you a little perturbed, considering that Carlyle was a proponent, someone who supported slavery, especially in his late periods. You know about that, right?
Yes. There's the controversies around that. Might get into it at some point, but I would kind of want to flesh out my argument for him.
Yeah. I mean, so do you want to talk about that? The way that this line itself is sort of like relates to that little fact we know. I mean, we can talk about this line itself in a sort of, he's talking about that you shouldn't think of your life in a monetary manner, but more in a you're whole with the world. You shouldn't be able to sell your life. You should just give it away for nothing. Or that it's actually not that big of a deal, someone's life's worth, because if they're working, especially the way slaves were working, which is very interesting, which interested me. I mean, it's not that...
Well, he admired, I think, the order of say, feudalistic society, and had deep concerns about where England was going in the 19th century, because the order was ripped out by the Industrial Revolution, by, were the people getting crammed in, this is the Carlylean position, right? Were the people getting crammed into the tenement houses and the slums of East London? Were they living a better life than they were when they were sort of under what you could consider slavery in feudal bondage to a lord, when they worked on the land? So I think Carlyle had a lot of sympathy with that old... It's a medieval romanticism. You see it in Tennyson. You see it in someone Carlyle didn't really like, Walter Scott, Ivanhoe. He didn't really like his works. I don't know. Personally, I don't think he bothered with them, but he didn't like how popular his works were. But both were still going for that same sort of medieval romanticism, right? That there was this order in a feudal England, which in the 19th century, especially early 19th century, Corn Laws England, felt like it was things. You could have argued things were getting worse for the working class, and it's class getting pushed into the city. So that is where he gets that from. That's where, if we're being kind to him, which I kind of want to be, because I think. And
also, it's fair to mention that Carlyle had this more idealized view of slavery, which was that slaves were actually... He does mention this in his slavery essay, although I've only read like a summary of it. He does mention that in his slavery essay that, he thinks that slaves are actually treated well, and he thinks that, they're just living a life of labor in a sense, while also being fed and given all the...
Exactly.
And he thinks that it's also like everyone's doing it, he thinks. Which is,
the owner meant to have a sense of noblesse oblige in the Carlylean ideal of it, and that they know they're sort of the paternal figure of this.
He hasn't seen the painting "Slave Ship" by Turner, for instance. Do you know that painting?
Yes, but I think he.
Yeah,
it's a difficult one, isn't it? Like,
very difficult.
I'm sympathetic with why he would have thought that at the time. When you see the state of where the people living in the slums of London were, that's where he was thinking, like, well, let's forget Robert Owen utopian socialism. What are viable alternatives? And he was probably looking at this, and was an element that it was removed from him.
And it's fair to like think that we just mentioned he was not like super into capitalism, but capitalism was one of the driving forces of what ended slavery, because people realized that slave work wasn't as profitable as they initially thought it was. They realized that real normal workers were way more productive in the sort of Carlylean sense.
Specialized their way out of needing a huge workforce at the same level.
Definitely. So other than that, what do we have?
The next one I have is a good bit down.
What is it?
Not the waste waves and their weedy Gulf streams. I don't know if you have anything for that.
No, you can read it though.
Well, I just had this bit about going through chaos, right? And you can picture this of what he's seeing when he sees the working poor, and he kind of gives a sympathetic view to feudalism. You could argue it's because he's right in the chaos of a changing order in society, and when you're right in the middle of that chaos, you don't know the stability on the other side of the whirlwind you're going through or the chaos you're going through, but you do know the stability that existed behind you, which is kind of why you can look at that with a sympathetic lens, because it's the only plateau of a sort of stability that you can see. So when he says here, not the waste waves and their weedy Gulf streams shalt thou take for guidance, thy star alone, sitte seguito a stella, thy star alone now clear beaming over chaos. So it's an image he's kind of gone for before. And I think I mentioned the last one was star guiding. The star guides you through chaos and guides you through moments of uncertainty. And I was thinking, well, it's Christmas here, so immediately I did think of the star. I mean, it's such a powerful image being used in loads of different things. The star guiding the three wise men you can think of that. It's like this. It's a guidance for them. Thy star alone, the star of Christ being born, and then also even in an older civilization like the Egyptians, who were obsessed with stars. And had them all, the pyramids were work, which once consecrated, they put their great men, pharaohs, into, and then had little tunnels and avenues of light that would point at specific stars, which were meant to send their soul across the chaos into the new star. And then each pharaoh would then become a star and guide the later generations. So I think he's tapping into a lot of, considering it's an image used so much in so many different civilizations, that's why he would probably like that as something that there is a truth in it. The star as being a guidance through chaos.
It's also fair to mention that the pyramids weren't built by slaves; they were built by workers. I think they uncovered that recently.
I saw a headline on that. I didn't go into detail. I'd be skeptical as to how free the pyramids were, to be honest.
But they did realize that people were paid wages and they were actually brought in from certain places, which is interesting because usually when you think, pyramids, they're built by slaves, especially the more left-leaning people would try to always use. I mean, I definitely heard it while I was in university. I heard it once mentioned, and I quickly mentioned, actually, they've made some research on that, and it seems they were somewhat workers and not slaves. And that gave me a lot of bad looks, I'll tell you that. Anyhow, other than that, I have only one more paragraph.
Yeah, I think it's the same one. So let's go.
The last one. Is it the same one?
Industrial work?
No. May it please your Serene Highness. You can.
We'll get in this industrial work one, I think.
I have a small one there. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not a full paragraph yet. So industrial work, still under bondage to mammon. The rational soul of it not yet awakened, is a tragic spectacle. And this touches in what we were talking about, where Carlyle saw England. Men in the rapidest motion of self-motion, restless, with convulsive energy, as if driven by galvanism, as if possessed by a devil, tearing asunder mountains to no purpose. For Mammonism is always Midas-eared. This is sad on the face of it, yet courage. You can trail it off there, but I thought it was interesting, and that's the Carlylean position. You could say is like, if you're not, you can't escape a certain element of slavery in your life. He talks about bondage to mammon. So he would consider that slavery still, but in a more decrepit manner, because it's your work isn't necessarily work of the type he wants. It's this rapid motion, a convulsion, right? That's what he's going for. It's someone possessed, but as if someone possessed by a devil, a sort of like a body. Think of a body shaking or going through a convulsion. And what it reminded me of was a piece on heroes and hero worship, on what he calls a semblance. So this reminds me of sort of a semblance of truth rather than it being truth. And I have the piece here on heroes. Let us remark, therefore, in the first place, that this of private judgment is at the bottom, not a new thing in the world, but only a new at the epoch of the world. There is nothing generically new or peculiar in the Reformation. It was a return to truth and reality in opposition to falsehood and semblance. And I think that's a real kernel of what Carlyle tries to get across in all his work. What around me is a falsehood or a semblance, and then how can we get that to be a return to truth and reality? And so I think he saw these sort of workhouses as bondage to mammon, as a falsehood and assembly.
Yeah, something that someone like, let's say, Milton Friedman would see as not as a bondage, but like the capitalist system as the liberator, in a sense, because in his words, that capitalism lets you work in whatever job you want to work in, which is debatable.
Friedman has the privilege of looking at it from a vantage point of he saw post-war America and the enormous growth that had occurred in it. Carlyle is going from the first convulsions of industry.
It's interesting how the way people view capital has sort of changed and also gotten worse over time in certain aspects of culture. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
No, I just thought it would be, it was a nice one. It just reminded me of that, his obsession with semblance. It's in one of the lectures on hero worship, and it's like this fidgeting, this working, which is a fidgeting rather than an earnest work, is a semblance. It's the falsehood semblance part of the truth reality falsehood semblance dichotomy that he had erected on hero worship. So I just thought I'd link it back there.
Yeah, it would be interesting to mention this further in hero worship when we get there. So other than that, I have only the last paragraph, which is quite short. I'll just read it then. We just reached the 1 hour mark, which is good. May it please your serene highnesses, your majesties, lordships, law warships, the proper epic of this world is not now arms and the man, much less shirt frills and the man. No, it is now tools and the man. That, henceforth to all time, is now our epic. And you, first of all others, I think, were wise to take note of that. So basically ends it in the same way he started, although he does sort of rewrite how history should be seen from then on. He's sort of saying that it's not like the Iliad or the Virgil, where it's arms and the man takes what he needs and builds a society. No, it's about tools and the man, and that's how we're going to go forth.
I think it's important he recognizes that as well. Because he had the references to arable, which is a nice metaphor, but being in the point of history in which he was, it's nice to see that little recognition of we're at this turning point. Armor Wurumke Kano, right? Arms of the Man I Sing is no longer it's no longer the thing that's going to make the emperor weep, the same way Virgil could make an Augustus weep. The epic of our time is different. And actually, I also just came to my mind while you were reading it, tools and the man, though. Not tools without the man, right? The man still needs to be there with his tools. And we talked about how he probably would have really liked the symbology of man reaching the moon, for instance, Carlyle, had he known that it would have happened. Because it's like a man traversing the chaos, which is empty space.
Yeah.
And it's just very interesting now with these further projects, landing rovers on Mars and so on, that it's the tool without the man. And it doesn't capture us the same way. So it's
Carlyle would have wrote a more somber version of The Martian, I think. You remember that movie?
Well, at least he makes the land arable in that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, indeed. He makes the land arable and then returns with the whole world helping him. It's sort of this USA kind of movie.
Yeah. Some of the tone of it a bit cringe, but I thought that was very interesting. He's saying the shift is from arms in a man to tools in a man, but the man remains constant in that.
Yes, it does. It's very.
Don't know if you had any closing remarks.
Yeah, you think people are gonna make epics from now on about tools and men? I mean, people sort of have been making epics about tools and the man. It's just not been as popular as Avengers, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting in Avengers. Well, actually, Tony Stark in the Avengers is kind of tools, and he's the most tools in a man. Whereas a Captain America is kind of an arms in a man. His strength is entirely bodily. Or Thor. So a lot of them are kind of this bodily strength. Hulk.
Yeah, we kind of.
The main character, Stark, is tools in a man. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we have sort of started in our own way, in our own weird way, started to take that to heart, even though nobody really reads this past and present that much these days.
But if I think about epic and how do you make an epic in the 21st century, right? I think if you go back and read the Iliad, I think there's a great part about strategy and motivation in it, right? Because Agamemnon has under his control Achilles, kind of under his control, right? That's the whole point. He has this great weapon in Achilles, but he's trying to motivate him to use them. So you can always tell an epic of in any sort of position where someone is trying to motivate another person to achieve this great goal, and then there's a struggle between the motivations there. So I think we can still tell great epics. You just need to think about. I know often you see people looking at the Iliad from either Achilles' point of view or Hector's point of view. It's like look at it from Agamemnon's point of view, and I think then you can sort of see a struggle which you can extricate and tell an epic from going forward. But it would be, you still got to motivate other people around you. I think even if you have all your other tools, you still got to galvanize.
He's not at all like on the side of this lonesome worker. That's sort of like this trope that's sometimes introduced. I think even in like Tony Stark, he kind of built, although he didn't build the first Iron Man suit alone, he did build the next ones.
But people want him to in the Avengers. They still want him to. They want that moment of collaboration, or where he can galvanize. And I think those movies are a mixed bag, right? They certainly got bigger than they needed to be, but just as a talking point, I think he's meant to grow as a character when he collaborates. And had he remained a solo man, it actually would have been seen as a failure of character. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And they wouldn't be able to make 50 movies out of it too. Okay. Well, that's how I think we can end this.
Yep. So with these tools and a man, I'm gonna end this broadcast. Anything to say?
Well, if you tune in next week, we will not next week, but the week after that, we will start talking about heroes, which will sort of relate to what we talked about with labor and reward, but in a much more broader manner. And it'll be easier to talk about, I think, heroes, because it is, in its nature, a more universal work. Carlyle isn't talking about one particular culture as he does in Labor and Reward. And it's also his, I believe, most well-known work, Heroes and Hero Worship. And he also prepared it for an audience, so it's more attention-grabbing, I think. I quite like reading Heroes and
there's a great tone to it.
Compared to this one, where there's like 75. We just removed 75% of reward, and we still got what it said, which can't be really said as much to the heroes. I think we will at least feel a little bad about removing certain parts of the heroes when we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't feel bad that I cut out all the corn law and all the deep death kingdoms. Although we did talk about deep death kingdoms, which was interesting. Anyhow, that's all I have to say.
Cool.
Roll us out.
See you in 2 weeks' time then for heroes.
Okay.